Now, I'd like to turn to the interview that we recorded earlier this morning with Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I want to talk about some big themes, including the future of democracy. But let me ask you this, because you've been weighing in on this subject. The World Health Organization, President of the United States wants to cut off all funding permanently, or is threatening to the World Health Organization. Give us your view.
Well, right now you've got to support it. I mean, look at the work that we can see in Africa. The World Health Organization is absolutely vital in providing equipment, advice, making sure that those countries with very weak healthcare systems are able to do what they can to mitigate the effects of the crisis. So right now you've got to support it. Now, long term, by the way, it's clear that you need a complete recasting of the World Health Organization, its structure, its organization, how it manages its business more effectively. But the point is, at the moment, it's right to support it. And it's also, I think, unfair to criticize the people in it, because I know from my own experience, they're working flat out. But let's be clear, prior to this global pandemic, the last time I had major interaction with them was over the Ebola crisis, because my institute was in all of the countries, 3 to 4 countries affected by it. So we were working during that Ebola crisis with the World Health Organization. That was a tiny crisis, effectively, in a small part of West Africa. You're talking about a global pandemic. So it's like, I don't know what the right analogy is, but to say the World Health Organization, to criticize them at the moment is to criticize them for not being what no one ever thought they would have to deal with, something as large as this. So I think afterwards, there will be I think it should be a calm and sensible and measured analysis of what's necessary to put in place the global architecture for pandemic preparedness. But I don't see any point in attacking the WHO now.
Could you grade Donald Trump's performance during the pandemic?
No, because I've learned through a long political life that usually I have enough troubles in my own politics without trying to grade other people's performance. But
who do you like on the world scene?
So for me, the difference is, and without getting into individuals, but for me, the difference is the governments that have acted fast and efficiently. And so those governments that went swift to lockdown, took a measure of the problem, ramped up the testing, are now building the infrastructure of containment, because we're going to have to live with this disease, you see. I mean, we're not going to eliminate this disease in the near future. With a vaccine over time, maybe we can, but in the near term, we're going to be living with it. So you've got to build the containment infrastructure that gives people confidence to move the economy back, because the economic damage of this thing is immense and terrifying, actually. But we're not going to be able to deal with it unless you provide people with the confidence that government's on top of the issue. So, you look around the world and you see South Korea and Germany, and, there are small and large countries that have done well.
Right. The reason I ask that is not just to stimulate an interesting answer from you, but this goes to the question of democracy. Since the close of World War II, the United States, with its wingmen, not to be condescending, but with Great Britain right by its side, has stood for globalization defined however you want, the spread of democracy, standing for freedom and transparency, and so on. I feel now, as do others, that the United States has left its traditional position as a global leader behind. I'm wondering if you agree with that, if you think that China is filling that role. Who will fill that role, and will it be a democracy? A lot of questions packed into that.
Right. Well, there's certainly a perception in the world that America has disengaged. And there's certainly an attempt by China to move into that position and assume more of a global leadership role. But I still think there is an intrinsic force and strength in liberal democracy. And I think the challenge of democracy today, in my view, is efficacy. It's understanding why these populist movements have arisen and what is necessary to do to defeat them. And that populism, I think, derives in part from people's feelings that the system is unfair for large numbers of people, that it has not delivered for them over a period of time. Stagnant incomes post the financial crisis, even to a degree pre-it, have played a huge part in this. And the reason why populists get support is the feeling that they will break up that system and move things. And I think we underestimate constantly the appeal. This kind of populist appeal is based on the notion that I'm faced with a brick wall and I'll punch my way through it, whereas these guys will just sit around and contemplate it forever.
Right.
And that concept of efficacy is the challenge. And that's why, for me, we've also got to be self-critical from the progressive side of politics about what we have been doing wrong, right? Which I think you can be quite clear about, actually.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. What specific challenges are posed to democracy by the pandemic? What is the specific threat of the pandemic to the future of democracy? And I think we both probably agree that democracy feels like it's a little bit on the back foot these days.
Yeah, democracy is definitely on the back foot. There's a weakening of the institutions and the respect for the institutions. Social media is a revolutionary phenomenon in its own right. Politics becomes more and more partisan. And the question is whether out of this pandemic, whereas I say the governments who put a premium on competence, effectiveness, getting the job done and getting it done at speed, the question is whether out of this pandemic, people say, well, actually what you want are reasonable, evidence-based political leadership that will take the right decisions on a practical basis, or whether the economic damage out of this and the social damage is so great that you get a whole new politics emerging, which is even more populist than what we've had before. Because I think there's no doubt at all to my mind the economic damage out of this is going to be profound, and it will affect the poorest in our society most. So they're the ones that are missing the schooling. They're the ones whose jobs are going to go. They're the ones that are insecure in the workplace anyway. It's frankly the people like you and me who can exist in this world much more easily than they can. So I think, and I don't think the public quite understands yet the depth of this economic problem that we're going to have.
Do you think that authoritarian governments bring any advantage to pandemic management?
I don't think they bring any advantage because they're authoritarian. I think speed of decision making, setting aside the normal rules of bureaucracy, are essential in these circumstances. But democracies can do that too. You don't have to be an authoritarian country to do that.
Right. Give me an example from UK history, US history of a democratic government managing a crisis of this scale competently and swiftly. I
mean, it's of this scale. I haven't come across one of this scale or of this nature. I mean, I had to deal when I was in government myself with probably the worst ever foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK that any Western country had seen. So but this was trivial compared with what we've got on at the moment. Post-financial crisis, of course, that was a major problem. But I think you've got to really wind it back. Yeah. Probably.
I was thinking about the defeat of the Nazis as a good example.
Yeah. Right. So, okay. So the reason why Churchill came to power was because ultimately people felt that you needed a leader that was a democratic leader, but had the capability to just push his way through and get the job done. And he did that really by changing the whole structures of government. One of the things that I've actually been critical of my own government here is, though I'm sympathetic, obviously, to the scale of the problem they're facing, is if you want to deal with this pandemic, you've got to deal with it by repositioning and reorganizing government fundamentally. And that means bringing in new people. That means changing the normal rules and regulations that you operate under. And that means an absolute laser-like focus on what's necessary to get the job done. So, but there's no reason why democracies can't do that. The citizens in this instance will support them doing that. I think what is difficult with democracy more generally is when it's appeared in the face of a a population that wants change to be simply managing a status quo that isn't working for a large number of people. Now, the left and the right then have their ideas about where they take that. So the right tends to go protectionist, anti-immigration, the left goes for a big state. And my view is that the single most important challenge that modern democracy faces is how to make sense of the technology revolution. It's the 21st century equivalent of the 19th century industrial revolution. I think out of this pandemic, by the way, technology, the need to utilize it will massively accelerate as a result of it. And the people who master that technology future and make it work for people, they're the people that will own the politics.
Right. Well, Mr. Prime Minister, we could talk all day, but you are, even though you're at home, you're a very busy man and have things to do, as does our audience. So I wanted to thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights. So thanks very much. And thanks to all of our speakers for joining us today. Thank you to the Peterson Institute and Emerson Collective, Chatham House, and of course, my hardworking colleagues at the Atlantic for pulling this all together. We hope that our audience, and we're very thankful to you, we hope that you will come to theatlantic.com and subscribe to our magazine to get all of our excellent journalism. And we hope to see you at another Atlantic digital event very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for joining us for The Way Forward, the Future of Democracy. Thank you to Churchill Capital Corps and Michael Klein for supporting our journalism throughout this series.